Hey everyone, I'm Danielle D'Souza Gill, and I will be hosting Dinesh's podcast while he's away this week filming in Australia with Tucker Carlson. He is having a blast down there, reaching so many people, which is super cool. So if you happen to live in Australia, definitely go to one of their tours. But I'm super excited to be here. If you don't know me already, I'm Dinesh's daughter. I'm also a mom to my daughter, and I help my husband, Brandon Gill, with his Congress run in North Texas. I am the author of 2 books, The Choice, The Abortion Divide in America, where I debunk the left's pro-choice lies, and Why God, an Intelligent Discussion on the Relevance of Faith. You can find me on social media. I'm on Truth Social, X, Facebook, Instagram. I'm at Danielle D'Souza Gill. So make sure to find me on there where you can stay in touch with me and find thoughts there. Well, all right. Today I am going to begin by debunking the left's feminist lies and unpacking what really leads to women's happiness. We'll also cover some Texas politics. We will speak with Luke Macias, who is a political analyst, and he will break down some Texas politics House races for us. And we will talk about the grassroots and how they are rising up to win big in November all over the country. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
America needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
The growing body of trans-affirming children's literature contains such propaganda titles as Who Are You Supposed to Be? And Red, a Crayon Story. The latter pertains to a blue crayon that was mislabeled as red, causing it to experience an identity crisis. Both books appear to be passing on life-affirming truths to a younger generation. Asking the very question, who are we supposed to be, provides an important moral lesson typically reserved only for Sunday school. And the trial of being mislabeled is the kind of thing that almost every conservative can relate to. But these stories aren't about objective truth or our human, moral, and spiritual characteristics and growth. These new books are solely concerned with that narrow dimension of reality pertaining to the physical characteristics of oneself. This, in and of itself, would be harmless enough, but in the service of the trans movement, there is a horrifying and bloody reality going on here beneath all of this sermonizing. That such material is being mass-produced for and read to children, and this is cause for alarm. At the heart of this movement are 2 key factors. The first is unhappiness. Many trans people are unhappy because they loathe their physical form to the point of engaging in self-harm. Second factor is a nincompoop level grasp of what gender actually is in these books. Both of these factors are traits the trans movement has inherited from its progenitor, feminism. It was feminism, after all, that introduced Western society to a set of ideas bent on denying the reality of the genders, with the goal of eradicating femininity. And of course, the ranks of feminism are full of self-loathing women who are in denial about what it means to be born female. It's not the same as male. Though feminism never marketed itself as the product of bitter, self-loathing scolds, those who clamp down on its bait have likewise become miserable. Relationship coach and author Suzanne Venker details the ways in which feminism robs women of their power in the flip side of feminism, what conservative women know and men can't say. A book she wrote with her late aunt, the conservative icon, lawyer, and activist Phyllis Schlafly. She summarizes the book's core ideas in a 2019 article entitled 4 Feminist Lies That Make Women's Lives Miserable. We can examine these 4 falsehoods, these 4 lies, against some independent research and thereby arrive at the same inconvenient truth that feminism hurts women by denigrating femininity and what it means to be female. The first lie is that single women are happier without a man in their lives. As to whether or not it's true, a 2019 Catholic News Agency article pointed out that with or without children, married women were almost twice as likely to report that they were, quote, very happy with their lives compared to single or separated women, according to the findings of a Paul Dolan, a behavioral scientist at London School of Economics. Interestingly, according to Dolan's study, having children while married results in a 4% increase in the likelihood for reporting, quote, very happy. This status of very happy while among separated or single women having children negatively impacts happiness levels by 3 to 6%. So not only are women on the whole happier being married, being with a man in their lives, that man's presence has a direct impact on how she feels about her happiness as well as her children and her family unit. The second lie that Vanker calls out is the preposterous claim that gender is a social construct. There are so many ways to refute this. I really don't know where to begin. Obviously, there's the physical, but leaving the most glaringly obvious differences aside, we can point to the 2019 NIH research that shows that even the brains of men and women differ. Men's brains contain more gray matter, possessing active neurons, while women's brains contain more white matter, which facilitates connectivity between the areas of the brain. Not only that, but the difference in complexity of male and female brains also means that men and women function mentally in ways that are fundamentally different. I know this may seem more controversial, but brain differences are but one of the many biological dissimilarities between the genders. Men and women show marked differences in the shape and lengths of their teeth, in heart volume, in how much they sweat when stressed, and the likelihood that they will suffer a heart attack, and in their capacity to detect even colors and smells. It should also be noted that women's pituitary glands produce prolactin, a hormone that stimulates milk production and the flow of milk, and also the flow of tears. Men, on the other hand, produced almost no prolactin. When you consider that these are just a few of the many physical differences that lead to the reality of human gender, the utter lunacy of asserting that gender differences are just a social contract or the craven deceptions of a power-mad patriarchy becomes markedly apparent. The next lie is the pernicious claim that modern technology has conquered the biological clock. In a word, no. According to UK fertility expert Dr. Gillian Lockwood, the ideal age for childbearing is still 25, and your ability to conceive falls off a cliff in your 30s. Of course, your mid-30s, drastically, and then your 40s, it becomes very difficult to conceive for a few and almost impossible for most. So Dr. Lockwood harshly criticizes medical experts who try to claim science says otherwise. After 40, even IVF has a less than 5% chance of working. Slim odds for anyone foolish enough to think biology can take a backseat to earning that corner office suite. Speaking of careers, that's the fourth lie, that having a career is more meaningful than marriage. We can allow that this is maybe true for an exception of people, but survey data shows that among all careers, the one with the highest rate of happiness for women is none other than that of the stay-at-home mom. This is according to a 2016 survey conducted by Redbook. Even more amazing, the data shows that the more children a mother has, the more likely she is to be happy, according to her own reporting. The survey found that mothers with 4 or more kids consider themselves, quote, very or extremely happy. What's interesting about this is that the feminist lie presumes that being a mother at home doesn't even count as a career. And yet, here it is at the top of the list for vocations that make women happy. Another interesting point is that among stay-at-home mothers, only 6% reported that they chose that path because of their spouse's wishes, as if they were forced to do this. So much for the tyrannical patriarchy. What's more, 2/3 of stay-at-home mothers also contribute to their household income in some way, even by running a small business from their home or doing something else from home. So generally speaking, not only does devoting oneself to being a stay-at-home mother surrounded by, ideally, lots of children lead to being extremely happy, quote, That same lifestyle also leads to a more personalized career path and one that is complete with its own tailor-made revenue stream. Feminists would rather you slave away as a faceless office drone, retire to a dreary and loveless, solitary existence where your work is your life, whereas non-feminists have discovered a life path that's both personally and professionally fulfilling and has proven to increase their satisfaction and happiness. It shouldn't be surprising that a philosophy that denies reality and encourages self-loathing leads to misery. The real question is, why? In the face of thousands of years of societal norms and the latest research data, some women keep falling for the feminist scam. Irony is that non-feminists have discovered and embraced the truth that the feminist and trans movements claim to represent, namely that it's by far better and healthier to live as who you are rather than as who you aren't. And this is actually what a lot of traditional and stay-at-home moms have realized, embraced, and that is why they have these higher levels of happiness.
You might have heard Mike Lindell and MyPillow no longer have the support of their box stores or shopping channels the way they used to. They've been part of this cancel culture, and so they want to pass the savings directly on to you by having a $25 extravaganza. Now, when Mike started MyPillow, it was just a one-product company, just the pillow, but with the help of his dedicated employees, Mike now has hundreds of products, some of which you may not even know about. So to get the word out, I want to invite my viewers and listeners to check out their $25 extravaganza. 2-pack multi-use MyPillows, $25. MyPillow sandals, $25. 6-pack towel sets, $25. Brand new 4-pack dish towels, you guessed it, $25. And for the first time ever, the premium MyPillows with the all-new Giza fabric, just $25. By the way, orders over $75 get free shipping as well. The amazing offer won't last long, so act now. Call 800-876-0227. The number again, 800-876-0227, or go to mypillow.com. Make sure to use the promo code. It's DINESH, Dinesh. We recently had some monumental news, not good news, but no one's talking about it. For the first time in our history, the interest we pay on the national debt surpassed every individual budget item except Social Security. That's right, the U.S. now spends more on interest than on national defense or even Medicare. And it's only getting worse as big government continues to spend like drunken sailors. This is why savvy investors, central banks, concerned savers are turning to gold, something that is not tied to the inflated U.S. dollar. You can too with the help of Birch Gold. For over 20 years, Birch Gold Group has helped thousands of Americans protect their savings by converting an IRA or 401k into an IRA in physical gold. To learn more, text Dinesh to 989898. Claim your free information kit on gold. No obligation, just information. Birch Gold has earned my trust with their education-first approach, their thousands of happy customers, and their countless 5-star reviews, which is why I buy my gold from Birch Gold. Protect your savings. Text Dinesh to 989898 today. Before I tell you about a very special offer, I want to first explain why the product I'm going to be talking about is absolutely worth it without the discount. I don't take any particular supplement just because I get a discount. Anything as important as nutrition, I'll research it first. Now, if you go to balanceofnature.com, scroll down to their homepage, you'll see that all the stuff that goes into each bottle of Balance of Nature's fruits and veggies, you'll see, like I did, this is all well worth it. But not just the ingredients, the real stories from real customers, and they have hundreds of thousands of customers. Each customer success story is just another example of how people are finding and taking this Balance of Nature fruits and veggies in a capsule. So take their risk-free money-back challenge today. Use my special promo code to get a 35% off your first order, plus a free fiber and spice supplement and free shipping. So here's the number to call, 800-246-8751. The number again, 800-246-8751. Or you can go to balanceofnature.com. When you use discount code America, you'll get my special offer. That's 35% off, plus free fiber and spice, plus free shipping.
I am delighted to welcome to the show Luke Macias. He is the host of the Luke Macias Show. He has a podcast. It's so interesting. I love listening to it myself. I get all of the information needed going on in Texas with grassroots activism. So if you are a grassroots activist living anywhere else all over the country, I promise this is going to be fascinating because he can explain to us all of the keys of how we can get involved all over, wherever we live. But here in Texas, we have this crazy political system where you guys probably heard about this on the show before, where in Texas politics, we're a red state, yet we have a House that was being run by Dade Phelan, who would give chairs to Democrats and would work with the Democrats instead of working with the right wing of the Texas House. So you guys may have been following this race. Unfortunately, Dade Phelan somehow won, although barely. Of course, he was running against David Covey, who was endorsed by President Trump. And so Phelan won that race, sadly. But I think that Luke is going to be able to tell us about what we can do moving forward in these kinds of situations. I guess this kind of segues into my first question, Luke. So, Luke, with someone like Dade Phelan winning again, which is so disappointing, is he going to be the Speaker of the Texas House again, or can we get a speaker who is going to work with more of a conservative agenda? What do you kind of see moving forward in the Texas House speakership?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Danielle. I do think that Dade Phelan is less likely to be the speaker than not. When it comes to the current situation, it kind of changes on a day-to-day basis. Some days it feels like he's 50-50. It is moving away from him. And what I mean by that is, at this point, a majority of the Republican caucus has come out and said that they don't support his style of leadership. They don't want Democrats to be given chairmanships. They don't want Democrats to help select the next speaker. They want it selected in the caucus. So basically, if this vote takes place in the Republican caucus, he will lose a majority of the votes. And honestly, it's probably beyond what just signed this letter. So about 52% of the GOP caucus signed this letter. Probably about 60 to 65% of the caucus does not support the reelection of the speaker, which is kind of a fascinating thing to think about. A Republican speaker in a Republican state where a majority of the elected Republican politicians, we're not even talking about the grassroots at this point, but the elected politicians are saying, we're kind of done with this guy. So his path is getting more narrow by the day, but he still ultimately has this Democrat caucus that will vote to keep him in power. So I think his chances are narrowing if the grassroots continue to put the pressure on the Republican elected officials in the Texas House, Republican caucus members. I think that they can remove him from the speaker's chair, even though he got reelected. And the one thing I would add to your point on his reelection is he won by less than 300 votes that were cast. It was basically 49.5 to 50.5, so about a 1% margin there. But over 1,600 Democrats voted in his runoff election. And so basically he spent $4 million. And by the way, the governor of Idaho spent $1.3 million to be in the governor's mansion. The governor of Arkansas probably spent less than $4 million. So we have a state representative in the state of Texas spending $4 million on just his runoff election and using a big chunk of that to go to all these Democrats in his district, bring them into the runoff. We don't have closed primaries in this state, which is something we're working towards. But Democrats can participate in our elections. And so they came over and they voted in that election to specifically keep him in power so that he could keep sharing all the power with the Democrats. So it's those facts, just as they get out there, I think wake up even more Texans to the problems we have with the leadership in the Texas House and why we need something different.
Yeah. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about this kind of larger issue of Republican infighting as far as money being spent. I mean, I feel like I look at these races and I think, oh my gosh, this is so much money being wasted from Republican donors. I wish I could just speak to the donors on the other side and say, hey, your money is being wasted. Instead of fighting another Republican, why don't you try to flip seats elsewhere? Why don't you focus on expanding our majority in the House or reelecting President Trump or whatever it is? Because it seems like they have this focus, and this happened with my husband Brandon's race, is these rhinos come in, they decide to spend money and they see, oh, super red area. We want to somehow control this and put in some moderate candidate instead of a true conservative. And so I think in like the Texas state politics, that happens too, where they say, oh, we know Republicans going to win, but we'll just make sure someone gets in who's kind of, I don't know, a moderate Phelan supporter type, someone who wants to just work with Democrats. why do these donors do this? I mean, why don't they focus on if they truly have moderate views? Look, that's okay, but I think that's okay if you're in maybe a purple place or a blue place, you want to flip that seat. I would say, that's fine. So looking at kind of national politics, I would say someone like Lisa Murkowski, maybe I'm not going to be as annoyed with her if she votes a certain way on something, because I know her demographic is just not going to be the same as somewhere that's R plus 50 or something. So I don't know why they can't focus their efforts on something like that. Have you ever seen any messaging that goes to these moderate type donors?
Yeah, so I think your point is well made. When you think of Susan Collins in Maine, we can be upset at a vote she takes, but she's in Maine, right? I mean, like the fact that there is a Republican in Maine is a big deal. So when you look at the donors in Texas, you have a group of people who really were a pretty dominant force, the moderate, more establishment George Bush type donor class, right? George Bush came from Texas, and his donor class really stayed in control until the Tea Party wave hit in 2010, 2012, and 2014. And we really went through, just to give people a very brief history, we went through 3 cycles where conservatives took over significant ground. They were a very small portion of the GOP. They became not the entire GOP, but a pretty sizable chunk. And then we had statewide elected like Ken Paxton and Dan Patrick, who set our state on a much more conservative trajectory. So this was the kind of peak of the Tea Party. In 2016, 2018, 2020, what we actually experienced was the moderate donors wrote larger checks than they ever have written, said, we're going to take these conservatives really seriously, and we're going to try to keep them from gaining any more ground. And each victory conservatives had during those 6 years, that we did have them, but they were fewer and far between because we were dealing with an opponent that took us really seriously. And then in the last couple cycles, we finally started to see conservatives regain massive amounts within the legislature, within the Senate, within Congress. And Brandon, your husband, is going to be a great example of that. If you look at the Texas delegation from Congress 10 years ago to today, you had no voices like a Chip Roy or a Ronnie Jackson or a Troy Nehls or a Michael Cloud or a Brandon Gill. They weren't existent out of Texas. We had these national voices that we looked at that said, hey, that's the kind of congressman we want to see, but none of them were coming from Texas. And all of a sudden, district by district by district, conservatives start to turn these places over. So I think what you have now is the last vestiges of those moderate donors are holding on to their power and are trying to fight for the little bit that they still have in the Texas GOP. So anywhere they can see them still having a foothold, they're spending more money than they ever have as they see that kind of power shift toward more grassroots conservative candidates. Ultimately, the question is, will they focus on the general? I hope that they focus some on the general, because we do have still some competitive districts in Texas. We have to maintain the majorities we have. But it does make sense to me that you have donors in the Republican Party, you and I both know them, who are not ideologically driven by an understanding of the cultural shift that's happening. These people are happy that they're successful in business. And they're pretty content as long as their particular industry continues to do well, the portion of government that's serving their needs is working, and they continue to profit off of whatever industry they're in. So a lot of those individuals, this is more of a business that they're involved in. I mean, it's almost like the political donations they give. I always say for some of them, it's like a marketing budget. It's just part of what they do. They own beer distributorships. They own major construction companies that are building the roads and getting the contracts. You know, they're in an industry that relies heavily on government subsidies, like the home hospice industry. I mean, I've been in these donors' houses for their annual fundraisers for the state elected officials. And the reality is you realize 80% of the money that this person's making is coming from government. Therefore, they're super connected to all the politicians. And so they don't like these grassroots candidates because they come in, they're far less predictable. One insider who's involved on a statewide level told me when he was explaining why they were helping candidates against a lot of our conservatives. He said, we do need some boring businessmen in office that are going to get the work done. And a lot of them look at it that way. They want people who show up. And what they really mean by that is we need people who aren't super concerned with the porn in the libraries and the open border and all the other problems that the
God
normal
forbid that would concern us.
They're sitting there going, look, I just need to make sure that the reimbursement levels for my home hospice business or, the transportation dollars that we're continuing to put that I'm profiting heavily off of continue. And I just need to make sure somebody shows up that cares more about that kind of stuff than the stuff that the people care about when you knock on their door.
I mean, nothing wrong with having a business and operating that way, but in the sense, it's kind of like, if that's the only thing you care about, we're not going to have a country anymore where you're able to do that. Because eventually it's like, we're the front lines that's preventing your whole business from collapsing or your way of life. And I feel like so many conservatives, especially from older generations, they kind of enjoyed a lot of the post-World War II America that was a better America, and they were able to go about their lives. But I mean, it's like Reagan says, freedom's only one generation away from extinction. And so it's like, if we don't protect that, like I would love to protect it so that we don't have to worry about this going on in schools. Yep. We don't have to worry about crazy things happening to our kids, and they could just play happily and you don't worry about it. You have a great business and, the government leaves you alone. But unfortunately, we're under attack at this point. And I truly believe, you were talking about the grassroots, that our base is truly conservative. They really are awoken to this. They realize how dire these times are. And I think that if they had all the strategy as well as the resources that these moderates have, they would win always. I think that the grassroots truly is the future, and the America First movement all over the country. I mean, President Trump is, of course, taking off, and he has better numbers now, I think, for this election than he ever had prior to 2016, 2020. And so I think a lot of people are waking up, and newer people are coming into the fold as maybe a very right-wing person, not necessarily a mod. I think like the mod viewpoint is kind of dying away in some ways. It's like maybe some elite Democrats and them have something in common because they're kind of like the uniparty or something. But most people, I would say, probably don't relate to it as much. When you look at Texas, what are kind of the goals moving forward that you think can be achieved in the Texas House, considering, who's won, who's lost, how everything kind of has played out? What are some things that could potentially get done in future? Would it be property taxes? Would it be school choice? What would be kind of the focus in your mind?
Did you, there was something you said, Danielle, that made me think of a scene. Did you ever watch the HBO show, John Adams, the series they did for John Adams?
I haven't. Oh, that sounds good. I think I heard about it though.
No, I mean, it was a very popular show when it came out, but there's a scene from that movie that's actually a quote pulled from a letter he wrote to Abigail while he was over in France. So they make it a much more dramatized scene than it was, but the quote is from a letter that he sent back to Abigail. And he talks about, in the show, it's him talking to this, I don't know, some elite French person. And they say, have you had time to go to the theater? Right. And he says, well, I haven't had time for the theater. And now all those French people are like very offended. Right. Benjamin Franklin's sitting there going like, dude, don't diss the theater. I mean, we're in France. And John Adams then stops. And what he then says in the movie is the same thing he told to his wife. He said, well, I am in a time where I have to study war and politics, and I do so in hopes that my children will have the liberty to study economics and agriculture. And I hope they do, so that their children enjoy the luxury of the theater and the finer arts. And so to some extent, that's a little bit how we talk about what we're dealing with today, right? It's like we would have loved to be in a time where America's culture and society and, church attendance and faith, all these things were in a different place where people started to rest on their laurels. We've all kind of woken up to the reality that, no, these are all the things in front of us. And it's not just roads and bridges and budgets that we can fix. We actually have kind of a cultural problem that we have to address, get to the bottom of. We wish we didn't, but this is what we're dealing with. So as far as what can be addressed in Texas, I wrote an article right at the end of the last legislative session called 48 Conservative Bills That Died in the Texas House. That is kind of a good starting point. And I did that exercise because we hear about onesie, twosie bills or one issue, and it's hard to kind of sit down, pull them all together and just say, this is what failed. Therefore, this should be the starting point of the next legislative session. The Texas GOP has laid out a really strong list of GOP priorities. And, any given legislative session, we pass laws in Texas 5 months out of every 24. We take 1,500 to 2,000 votes. So really this is saying of those 1,500 to 2,000 votes you take, can you make sure that 20 to 25 of them are these bills? So E-Verify is a great piece of legislation. We still have taxpayer subsidies for those here illegally. If you graduate at Texas high school, even though you came here illegally, we will discount your college tuition, which means we actually write a check from our treasury to the university. Say, thank you for educating this Texan. Here's money to discount their tuition. And we do that even for those here illegally. And so there's basic taxpayer benefits that we can remove. And then there's strengthening our laws on actually taking illegals when they cross into Texas and taking them back across the border. If Trump wins, which I think we all think is more likely than not, as long as they don't steal it from him this time, then he'll be in a good position to basically work in partnership with us. But Texas needs to make sure that we have this approach regardless of who's in power at a federal level. So there's quite a bit on the immigration level. There's quite a bit on the transgender level. We passed the sex change surgery ban on kids. I call that the 20-week abortion ban. It's just the worst of the worst stuff that we stopped. So there's a lot more room when it comes to the social transitioning of these kids, when it comes to how the public education system engages in the social transgender transitioning of kids, when it comes to the fact that you can change your birth certificate. You know, we have these parents that will go in, and Texas basically teams up with them and participates in the lie and is willing to tell a 4-year-old boy, you were actually born a girl, even though he wasn't. And so now he can be given a birth certificate that shows he was born a girl, and they're allowed to change the sex of their child at birth even years later. So there's some laws. We have to close those loopholes. All of the drag show stuff, I'm sure you followed Texas Family Project, but they send people to these drag shows and film all the debaucherous activity done in the presence of children. There was one bill passed to try to get to that, and that was actually struck down even by the conservatives in the Fifth Circuit. So we have to find a more creative way to basically come down on any and all facilities that actually host these drag shows for these kids. We need to basically fight to protect the sexualization of kids. There's multiple ways of doing that, but there's a list of bills on that level that start to eat away at that movement. A good example, it's a policy. They're kind of, let's say, seemingly small policies, but they do have an effect. So you can't tell a library they can't host a drag show. I think you should be able to. That's a whole First Amendment conversation. Michael Knowles has done a great job talking about this issue, and others about how the right wrestles with the First Amendment. But let's just accept like a purist First Amendment perspective and say, well, you can't tell them they can't do it. Well, there is a bill that says if a library does host a drag show, then they don't get any state funding. And that's fine. And so you do that, and effectively you have banned it from happening. All these drag queen story hours at libraries will stop as a result of that bill. It passed the Senate, died in the House. There's a bunch of election integrity bills that need to pass. There were about a dozen bills that passed the Senate and died in the House last session on that issue. So I'm sure I could go on and on and on, but I think immigration, election integrity, this entire sexualization of Texas kids in the classroom, but not just in the public education system, even beyond that, I think is really important, and a ton of other things, but that's kind of a start.
Yeah. How do those, like, just picking the sexualization of the kids one, how does that slip through the cracks where it's like, oh, this is going on in Texas and now we have to stop it? It's like, why isn't the default like, whoa, that's not allowed? Yep. And then the other side has to try to like get it to happen or something. Although I don't know why they would do that. But in any case, like, why are we at this point where we now have to get back to getting rid of it?
This is our posture problem, right? The posture of the right, where in the left, as soon as they see something they don't want, they, shut the whole thing down. And they really do go to the root of it. And California is a good example. It is illegal in California for an adult therapist to have somebody come to them and say, I have sexual ideas and thoughts and desires that I don't want to have, right? And that therapist can then say, I'm gonna work with you and help you. Well, if that therapist believes that we're created in the image of God and we have there's an ordered desire and a disordered desire and wants to help that person, they're not even allowed to have that conversation. It's illegal in California. They say you cannot in any way help anybody who has the LGBT ideas or thoughts or desires not have them, right? But so they went to the root. They're like, we don't even want you to be able to have these discussions. And that was upheld in the court system. But you come down to Texas and we don't go at the therapists. We are very reactionary. And then we kind of try to do the bare minimum. Like, hey, let's stop the worst part of this. The left is going to take every little loophole you give them and use it, right? You go, okay, fine, we can't sex change them, but we're going to dance mostly naked in front of them and talk to them about all these ideas. And we're going to go into the school system. So they're willing to take any ground in any area you give them. And so when you do approach it, I know you're used to seeing this on a national level too. Many on the right, they get 1 or 2 victories and then they just ride on those for a couple of years. So, hey, we passed this bill that bans abortion at 20 weeks. And they kind of ride that out for a year or two before they feel like they need to do the heartbeat bill. And the same can be said for many of the other cultural issues. We tend to take 1 or 2, where the new right, I think, has this perspective that says, this isn't about a narrative win. This is about addressing the root cause. We want to find out the root cause, and then we want to address it as aggressively as humanly possible so that the left knows that they're not welcome to perpetuate these ideas on our kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw recently there was a teen in, I think, Fort Worth, although I'm sure this has happened elsewhere, who, according to like AI, her classmate created AI porn. I think Ted Cruz talked to her about the problems with this. It's like, we are living in times that weren't normal for other generations. So they're probably just mind blown. Like, how does this even happen? I'm also mind blown. And so I think that it's like we have to take more drastic measures than we would initially think. We'd normally think, oh, we'll just have kind of like normal rules and stuff and things will work out. Well, not anymore. I mean, we're living in a time when technology is crazier than ever. And as you mentioned, anytime there's any kind of gap, it's like the liberals are going to fill it. They're going to step in and say, well, we're going to push this to the absolute limit. And so then we then have to say, well, we can't leave any room, basically. We have to go to the root of it, as you say. So with things like this going on, I mean, is there anything that can be done in terms of laws? I mean, how can we, I guess, be on the frontier of things as they're happening, as opposed to, as you said, only reactionary?
So one bill that was just announced to be filed a couple weeks ago that I think is a good example of a way to get to even the issue you're talking about is Representative Ellen Troxclair out of Travis County actually filed a bill, or announced that she's going to file a bill to try to pass next session to basically get smartphones out of public schools entirely. And there's ways of effectively doing this. This is something that Jonathan Haidt and a lot of other social psychologists have come in and said, hey, this is very damaging to children. You can't ban it from being used by children. I think we should maybe consider that. But at some point, you come into the public school system and you go, that's where a lot of kids are exposed to pornography, is at the public school system by somebody else's smartphone. And as young parents, we kind of start to study the statistics and start to read all this information. You go, yeah, I don't want my kid exposed to this kind of stuff. So you say, look, the amount of damage that these smartphones are doing to kids' brains is pretty substantial. Not just the social media exposure, but just the smartphone in general. And so saying, hey, within the public school system, when kids come in, we're going to actually set up a system where they're checking their smartphones in. It's in a case. If the mom needs to get a hold of the kid, they call the actual school like they used to.
Yeah,
hey,
right.
My fourth grader, I need him. And then you call over the loudspeaker, Johnny, come to the office. And they go and they talk to their mom. That's actually a way better situation. And you think, well, I can't text my kid. Well, your kid's in 3rd grade. He's actually not supposed, you don't want him to be in a mindset that he has to check his phone all the time.
Texting you during class.
To figure out what's going on. And that's the problem, right? We have teachers can't take away the kids' phones. We've seen these issues that have happened nationally. That's an example of a policy where I think you look at it and you go, hey, that would be good to do because, yes, there are actual issues it's addressing, but it is trying to get a little bit more to the root cause of the damage that's happening on kids in general. There have been conversations about social media bans in Texas of kids where you actually make age requirements and say in our state, kids of these ages cannot actually access social media accounts. And you put the onus on the social media company to not allow Texans at a certain age to have an Instagram account, to have a Facebook account, just protecting them. So that's probably not one that necessarily people think about a whole lot, but ways we can start to get to the root causes. And if anybody's listening or watching this from another state, they can take any of these policies and then go to their legislator. And that's the way we get a lot of stuff done in Texas, right? Louisiana just passed a law to put the 10 Commandments in every single classroom. Every single classroom will have the 10 Commandments displayed. 90% of Republicans support this, 60% of independents, 40% of Democrats literally support putting the 10 Commandments up. This isn't some radical idea. Louisiana is the first state in the union to do it. Texas would have been the first state in the union to do it, but the Texas House killed a bill that the Texas Senate passed last April. So hopefully we'll pass it again. Our Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick just said, I'm filing this again. We're going to be the second state if we get our act together and the Texas House gets a new speaker. So that's a good example where I bet you, if you're anybody in another state and you happen to have a legislator that you have any type of relationship with, or even someone in your state, you could message them and say, why don't we have the 10 Commandments on display in every classroom? There's no way that wouldn't have an effect on the way our children think, on the value systems they have, on the moral compasses that are developed. So just a few examples.
Yeah, for sure. Do you think that looking forward to kind of the fall, what are the biggest things that you recommend grassroots activists focus on so that we can, I guess, defend our elections, make sure that things, are protected? What are you telling grassroots activists to do for the rest of this year? Because a lot of the primaries, I think, are wrapped up in Texas and will be wrapping up in a lot of other states around the country. So what is the grassroots focus for just November with Trump and everything?
And that's a great question. So first and foremost, I do think that Trump ends up being kind of the main focus. In Texas, we have certain areas that matter. Tarrant County and Fort Worth, Williamson County, just north of Austin. There's these swing counties that Trump has won and lost. 1 in 16, lost in 20. So any of those areas that are swing areas are really, really important at that point. The way I think of November, if you're a grassroots activist in a very Republican area, is that it's a great opportunity to further organize in a helpful way for all of Texas. So rural Texas basically saved Ted Cruz, saved Donald Trump. They'll continue to save the Republican ticket. So just because you're in a county that's 65% or 70 or 90% Republican in some of these rural counties, it's not an excuse not to make sure that everyone actually gets out and votes. But the exercise of that muscle to organize, to reach out, to build a network gives you even more people that you can then pull into the fight next year when we're trying to pass bills and later in the year when you're trying to work on primary elections. So you're constantly building this list of people in your community that care about issues. It's easier to get people to care in the general, right? So you use that as kind of the low-hanging fruit to get someone to vote, to get someone to show up to a Republican meeting, to get someone to show up and to the local Republican Party to do some election integrity, sign up to be a volunteer and monitor the elections in your county office, something like that. But it's almost an easy hook to get these people engaged. Maybe get somebody who's successful financially to give a donation in a race that matters and he's never donated politically. So take that opportunity to get these people in and then actually track them to pull them in further. So if they care and they see some successes, you say, hey, would you like to come down to the Capitol with me? I'm going to go lobby on this issue. Hey, we're trying to get somebody in our area to run for office. Would you be supportive of them if they step into the arena? So you get people out in November because we need to win, but a lot of times it's like flash in the pan. We all spend a ton of money. We spend all of our energy and November happens and we all go back to living our lives. But if you look at it like an infrastructure build, you go, how do I actually use all the work and energy we generate in September and October to then pull these people more into a next level of activism?
Yes, that would be amazing. Well, Luke, thank you so much for your insight, your advice. I mean, you are amazing. You're doing such great work in Texas. So make sure to tune into Luke Macias' show. And Luke, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Danielle. Thanks for having me on.
We recently had some monumental news, not good news, but no one's talking about it. For the first time in our history, the interest we pay on the national debt surpassed every individual budget item except Social Security. That's right. The U.S. now spends more on interest than on national defense or even Medicare. And it's only getting worse as big government continues to spend like drunken sailors. This is why savvy investors, central banks, concerned savers are turning to gold, something that is not tied to the inflated U.S. dollar. You can too with the help of Birch Gold. For over 20 years, Birch Gold Group has helped thousands thousands of Americans protect their savings by converting an IRA or 401k into an IRA in physical gold. To learn more, text Dinesh to 989898. Claim your free information kit on gold. No obligation, just information. Birch Gold has earned my trust with their education-first approach, their thousands of happy customers, and their countless 5-star reviews, which is why I buy my gold from Birch Gold. Protect your savings. Text Dinesh to 989898 today. Have you heard about the groundbreaking film hitting theaters nationwide this summer? Get ready for The Relentless Patriot. It's a captivating documentary by Global Ascension Studios, Hollywood's first ever conservative movie studio, headed by Joshua Macchiello. This isn't your average documentary. It's a powerful tribute to American patriotism and activism, following Scott Lobaido's remarkable journey from stirring flag renditions to outspoken advocacy for our service members. Scott's story is one of unwavering dedication and unfiltered passion. Join the movement for the special release of The Relentless Patriot. Experience Scott's journey, feel the pulse of American patriotism. Don't miss this unforgettable cinematic experience. Be part of history with The Relentless Patriot. Brought to you by Global Ascension Studios.
Well, that wraps up today's show. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to follow me on social media. If you liked the episode, you can find me on Truth Social, X, Instagram, Facebook, all the places. I am at Danielle D'Souza Gill. So make sure to connect with me on there so we can stay in touch. And I will see you all tomorrow. MAGA.
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and SalemNow.com.